we thank you. As I stated earlier, we're going to ask you to please enter your name for a question on the chat so we can ensure that we call on you and get everybody to have a chance to ask any questions they might have on their mind. We also want to remind everyone that the Tucson Hispanic Chamber is a nonpartisan organization, and this is the first session in a series that we will be holding at the Chamber in which we support dialogue with our leaders. So again, we want to thank Senator McSally for taking time this morning to join us, and I am going to go ahead and turn it over to her. Thank you, Senator McSally.
All right, well, thank you. I hope everybody is well. Thanks for having me today. I'm in Washington, D.C., deployed back here now, been in session the last 3 weeks. We're all in this unprecedented challenge together. I know things have been very difficult, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear as I'm engaging with constituents. There's fear for our loved ones, for individuals who have underlying conditions, the elderly. We all have friends who've been through, have immunocompromised or have other health conditions. Plus, I mean, my mom's 85. Like I know we all have concerns for the health of people who we love in our lives with this pandemic. As we're learning more and more about the virus every single day, it seems, the more we know, the more we don't know. But then also the economic impact of this unprecedented challenge where we've asked people not to work in order to flatten the curve and protect our frontline healthcare heroes and ensure we have the healthcare capacity to deal with this pandemic. It's been some tough weeks, and I know we've got some difficult days ahead, but I'm a glasses half full person always. Every day we go through is a day closer to defeating this virus, which we will with the amazing innovation that comes out of our country and the amazing research that's being done in record time for treatments and vaccines and other things. And as we've learned a lot about the virus, and we've learned about those essential services that have been ongoing during all this and how they've been able to conduct themselves without becoming hotspots of more of the spread of the virus. That's really important lessons learned as Arizona is opening back up. And this is not a false choice, I think, as some have tried to characterize it. You're either focused on saving lives or you're focused on the economy. We need to do both. There are certainly health and other human implications of people all over Arizona and all over America not being able to provide for their families, not being able to work. Small businesses, people have put their whole lives into and their livelihoods into to create their small business, and the risk of them not existing. The impact that has on people's also their mental and physical health is very real. I mean, up and down my street in Rita Ranch, we have people who are living paycheck to paycheck, working hard, never needed government assistance, and then all of a sudden there's no paycheck coming in. So our approach, many of you have probably heard me say this on calls like this and other ones, but our approach initially, as we were learning about the massive implications that this virus and the flattening the curve efforts that we were all asked to do, was to, as quickly as possible, get relief out, financial relief. And usually speed and the federal government are not in the same sentence, right? And there's speed in passing legislation, but then there's also, we wanted to make sure whatever we passed had the ability to be implemented quickly, because you could pass legislation, but if the infrastructure isn't there to implement something quickly and efficiently and effectively, which are often trade-offs, then that wasn't going to be impactful either. So as we looked at options to just get cash out the door, speed was the top attribute that we were looking for. For example, we immediately getting those, I don't like calling them stimulus checks, but as quickly as possible, getting the money out to anyone who made less than $75,000. We knew that we would use the same mechanism that happened in 2008, 2009. It took them like 3 months to do that last time. We have more information with people filing their tax returns online where the bank information is available. We wanted to quickly get that out the door. We knew it wasn't going to be perfect because the IRS doesn't have perfect information on who passed away a few months ago or other dynamics that happened, but we wanted to just get the cash out the door. Same thing with the plussed up unemployment, was get cash out there. We don't need people falling into more food and health and housing insecurity as we're trying to get through this, asking people not to work. So plussing up those unemployment benefits. You guys may have some questions on that. The only way to do this with 50 different systems, 50 different processes within states, 50 different technical systems, was to just do a plus up of a certain amount, which we added $600 across the board. That still was very difficult to implement. We've seen that in Arizona, just technically and process-wise, plus expanding who is eligible: self-employed, independent contractors, gig economy workers. They're not normally eligible. So even just figuring out how to process that has been challenging, but we wanted to, again, get cash out the door as quickly as possible. And then the focus on small businesses with the PPP loans. As we looked at that, we said, when we looked at disasters, oftentimes we have these disaster assistance loans, but they take weeks and months to process. When you've maybe had one regional hurricane, we don't have weeks or months. We have days. We got to get money out there quickly. We can't have everybody standing in line, single file, to a federal agency to process paperwork all over the country. So we looked at what existing infrastructure is out there. Well, it's financial institutions, and every community, nearly everybody has a relationship with a bank, a credit union, some financial institution. If we could just distribute out the labor so that they could do the initial processing, and then, it still had to go through the very narrow bandwidth of the SBA system to get the final approval, but at least distribute out the first several steps so that we could get money out the door as quickly as possible with PPP. So that was the approach we took in a very, strong bipartisan way. There was other things in the CARES Act, but we're just talking about immediate cash, get it out the door as quickly as possible. Look, I know there's been glitches. Anytime you're trying to do something new and fast, and federal government, there's going to be glitches. There's going to be high profile stories. We've seen them of people taking advantage of broad guidance. And the way I tried to describe it is just like we're asking people, don't fight over toilet paper at Costco if you don't need any more. Same thing with PPP. We're asking people to operate with selflessness and good faith as we're all in this together, trying to minimize the damage, blunt the blow, keep small businesses afloat, and get through this together so that we can get the economy going as fast as possible. Imagine where we were 6 months ago with this economy so strong. And the biggest challenge that I heard from businesses around Arizona was more jobs open than people looking for work, right? And so now here we are in a very different situation. One of the other objectives we had with PPP was keeping workers and employees connected to each other. The benefits of this are psychological. Many your small businesses, you feel like a team, you're a family. Even if you were not able to work, just hunkering down and hanging in there together, keeping people on the payroll, that helps with the stress of getting through this situation. It helps with health insurance continuity. It helps with not completely jamming the unemployment system, which was already overwhelmed with everybody lining up for unemployment. It helps with having a trained and ready workforce. When you're ready to ramp back up again, you don't have to start looking for workers. And so one of the key designs of that PPP was to keep people and incentivize keeping people on the payroll, even if they were not working. And I've talked to many small business owners. I know this makes your head hurt. Why would I be paying people when I don't have any work for them to do? It's just because this is an unprecedented crisis, and we're asking people to stick together and stay on the payroll. If the money's going to come from the federal government, we'd rather have it flow from the federal government to the financial institution, to the employer, to the employee, than through the unemployment process, than having challenges with how we're going to ramp back up again. So just wanted to share kind of some of our philosophy as we put the CARES Act together. Again, I know it's been clunky. I know there's been glitches. We've been working with a lot of small businesses, especially in those early days of that first tranche, a lot of frustration. And I, was concerned that as we were choosing the financial institutions to be the conduit, quite frankly, it's not their money, it's taxpayer money flowing through them to small businesses, and the definition by law of small businesses is 500 FTE or below. I was concerned about reports, you all saw them, where some financial institution appeared and in reality were favoring businesses that had debt relationships with them. It was in the bank's best interest to keep them afloat because they owed them some money. Or, people who had, client relations on speed dial versus the self-employed, the mom and pop shops, the people who couldn't get a call back or were initially rejected outright. And they'd been banking there for years or decades going, what the heck? So this was a big point about it. I knew we were going to shine a flashlight on it later, but in the middle when we had tranche 2 of PPP, I don't know if you saw it, we've had some calls on this, but I also sent out a tweet that says something like, "Dear big banks, the PPP money is not yours, it's the taxpayers' money. And you better be given the same attention to mom and pop shops and small business, really very small businesses, so that they can get access, so they can stay afloat." So I'd love to hear your feedback. I know there's still some challenges out there, although I will tell you there's still PPP money available. So if you got turned away when you've applied early on, try again. Try a different institution. I can't pick one over the other, but I'll tell you, some institutions have been far more responsive than others. And there's other ways for you to be able to get access. There's still money there, so don't give up. Also, I'm working with Chairman Marco Rubio, who's the head of the Small Business Committee. Right now, we're actually trying to pass legislation today that provides more flexibility on the timeline of PPP. Originally, it was to keep people on the payroll for 8 weeks. We're trying to extend that to longer because we're realizing we're in this for a much longer period of time. And I have legislation that the forgivable piece is related to payroll and overhead, but I have legislation that we're trying to include some portions of. Literally, I was just texting about it with Marco. If we're able to move this today, I don't know, it's got to pass unanimously, and it's Washington, D.C., so you never know, somebody might trip it up. That would allow expenses that small businesses use for PPE. And my legislation says, hey, if you're spending money on PPE, so masks, gloves, other things, these were things not in your budget before. These are COVID-related expenses, or other expenses like disinfecting and cleaning. Or look, I'll tell you, I'm safely trying to support small businesses when I'm back in Arizona. I've got my haircut. I've gotten a pedicure, I've gone out to restaurants, I'm doing everything I can, to show that we can safely do this. I'll give you an example. When I went to get a pedicure, they innovatively came up with these like wooden stanchions they put around each person that clearly somebody built in their garage, at the local salon. But the stanchions were up here, if you can see my hands here. So, and then the top part was all plexiglass. And then the bottom, there was like an opening where my knees and below were, so they could work on your feet. But if I sneezed, even though I had a mask on, it would go on the plexiglass. But they had to spend money to create these, and they're putting barriers between each person. So I want to make sure that those are forgivable expenses as well. We're going to try and roll as much of my legislation into the PPP flexibility legislation. We'll keep you posted on that. There's also importance of getting guidance out there on what's forgivable and how you need to document it, especially for self-employed, because if it's your salary to yourself, do you have to put receipts for food and gas? I mean, that's not normal if you were doing that for just payroll. How do you document what's forgivable to make sure that it actually is getting forgivable? So we've been really pushing on Treasury to get that guidance out and greater clarity on that. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I know these are tough times. We want to do everything we can to keep these small businesses afloat as we move back towards a stronger economy again, and just work together to provide the opportunities to propel that economic activity while also continuing to protect the vulnerable. I just came from a hearing the aging committee where we're talking about nursing homes and assisted living facilities and everything we need to do in order to put a moat around the congregate vulnerable. 79% of Arizona deaths have been over the age of 65. So what can we do in order to protect anyone from unwittingly bringing in the virus to those places while we allow people to safely return to work? So we're doing all the above here. I'm honored to be able to serve you. Happy to answer any questions, but I want to stay ear to the ground on what's happening out there in your businesses and what else we can do to help.
Thank you, Senator McSally. Our first question comes from Pamela Krim. Pamela would like to know, can you comment on the fact that the 501c6s were left out of PPP funding, and will there be a chance to support us in the future? Thank you, and hope you're doing well.
Thanks, Pam. I see you there. I hope you're doing well. This is something that we heard loud and clear from multiple C6s. We got on a letter specifically about this, saying, hey, we gotta widen this to include C6s. It wasn't in the initial legislation, unfortunately. So if there is any additional PPP going forward, that's something that we've said is really important for us to move on. But the PPP as authorized right now, they're not included. So we hear you. There's a lot of C6s out there that are helping small businesses, that are helping people every single day. And the challenge we had, just to be frank, is the NFL is also a C6, right? So we have these broad categories. Right? But if we leave it to 500 and below, then that C6s like that should be filtered out, hopefully, so we don't have some of these other high profile, like head scratching, like how did they get access to this? So that was one of the initial challenges. A C6 is a very broad category, but I think if we narrow it, we keep it at that small business element, then you'll be able to focus on organizations like all of yours.
Next question comes from Esther Marie Hillman. Esther Marie would like to know, I'm so sorry. Are there written contingency plans created in the process for if we do have additional virus breakouts that will work to isolate areas rather than completely shutting down?
So as I mentioned, we are learning a lot about the virus every single day. And if you think back to where we were in March, we didn't know a lot about this virus. Look, China covering it up did not help. That's a separate topic we can get into, but the lack of information and the cover up and the disinformation campaign out of China did not help the world or our country prepare for this. So we really had to learn when we saw it go to Europe, saw it come to America, and we didn't know. If you think about where we were, they were telling people, do not wear masks. Remember that? They were saying, do not wear masks. They were saying, that check your temperature because it's really, if you have a temperature is the issue. We now know, we weren't really sure how it was transmitted. We weren't really sure whether it was in droplets, or we hope it'll negatively impact it like we see with similar viruses like the flu, but we don't fully know that yet. What we've been able to do in efforts to flatten the curve is buy time to understand the virus better, to ensure we had the healthcare capacity and the PPE for our frontline healthcare heroes, to make sure we had enough hospital beds, enough ICU beds, enough ventilators, and the PPE. Look, one of the things that we've learned through this is we cannot be relying on other countries, especially China, for our PPE. We were beholden to them in order to get masks and gowns and gloves. We got to stop that. Now we're ramping up in an emergency way internally. You see Honeywell and other Arizona businesses are ramping up to produce these things, but we had to get a lot of it from overseas initially. So we were buying time with this flatten the curve, stay home, and all that goes with it. I think because we've learned a lot, these guidance will come out at the federal level, decisions will be made at the state level, but I think we've learned enough that my hope is that we can have enough situational awareness and testing that we know, again, 79% of deaths are over the age of 65. We know the vulnerable are those who are elderly, those who have underlying health conditions, and where they are in groups like hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living, independent living, we need to do everything we can to provide a protective moat around them. And as we focus our testing, it's not realistic for someone like me to get tested every day. It's just not realistic, right? And look, I finally got tested because I was flying on Air Force One and I was negative, okay? Obviously in order to get on the plane. But just because I was negative that day doesn't mean I wasn't positive the next day, because I could have touched a door at a grocery store and touched my eye by mistake. And so as we think about where should we focus the testing? I think the testing needs to be focused on protecting our most vulnerable, putting that moat around nursing homes, assisted living, independent living, hospitals, right? So if we can get to a place, my nirvana is we get to a place where every day, every nurse, every doctor, every nursing home staff comes to work, we test them. We also do the antibody testing. So if you got the antibodies, you don't have to be tested every day because you already have the antibodies. So let's raise our situational awareness. Let's protect the most vulnerable. Let's allow people to use best practices to safely return to work. If we see that it's starting to pop and become a hot spot in the community, we have the ability now with higher situational awareness to mitigate. The words contact tracing are concerning to some people just from privacy purposes. There's ways, contact tracing doesn't work when there's wide community spread, but if you're able to get it down to where it's there's not hot spots, but all of a sudden it starts to pop again. Maybe somebody traveled somewhere, came back. Then you can maybe quickly isolate the new cases, identify with their agreement who they've been around, not by violating their privacy like happens in some other countries, and then figure out how to isolate it, mitigate it, contain it, while also allowing people to work. So I think all that we've learned in the last several months would allow us, if we start to see an uptick happen again, would allow us to do it in a far more targeted manner to protect the vulnerable, ensure we have healthcare capacity, but still allow people to work instead of this blunt force that we did early on, which was just shut everything down while we try to figure it out. That's my hope. These decisions will be made by the governor, but I think it puts us in a much better place now.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Next, we have Laura from Academy for Caregiving. Laura, would you like to share your question? It's a pretty long one. I don't want to.
I've sent several questions, so let's see.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator, for joining us today. First of all, I wanted to thank you for your advocacy in renewing the PPP. Yeah, it was a disaster the first time around, and we didn't expect what, you know, some people, how some people were going to handle it. So the second round of funding, it really reached a lot of the small businesses, including my own small business. Thank you very much for that advocacy. Now, the future is uncertain for small businesses. So it's, you know, it helped short term for the next couple of months.
Yeah.
Is there anything in the works for long-term solutions to help small businesses and therefore help, you know, hundreds of thousands of jobs out there?
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for your feedback that you were able to finally get access to it and your persistence. There's more money out there still for those who are listening who maybe gave up. So there's still, you can still apply for PPP. As we're looking at it, Arizona, as you know, we're open, but with restrictions, and that just because you can't open doesn't mean there's consumer confidence to have the same level of activity as before. So it's a combination of things that is going to bring the revenue back up. And as you know, some businesses are going to be really challenging. It's tough in the restaurant business for you to apply the restrictions. They're already at tight margins. So we're not going to immediately jump back to where we were. Other parts of the country are still totally shut down and not nearly totally shut down. And so that I think as we're looking at it, we really want to encourage the opportunity for people to safely return to work, right? Allow that revenue to come in, because everyone needed to provide federal resources out there, but $3 trillion is a lot of money. And if we're going to provide additional federal support, it needs to be targeted in order to kind of propel the economy back while we're still defeating the disease. We can't possibly, with, you know, taxpayer money, continue to try and replace payroll forever, right? It's just not a realistic thing. So it's the combination of getting the revenue back, going again, building confidence, supporting small businesses while still defeating the disease. So I think if we needed more PPP, that is certainly a conversation that would be worth having if it needs to be more rounds or, you know, extended. I think other conversations are about tax credits and payroll tax cuts and other tax incentives, just to be able to help with the cash flow. As confidence is building and to encourage investment. You know, one thing you might have heard talked about is returning the business deduction for like travel and meals, trying to encourage people to, you know, get on airplanes again safely and, you know, go back out to dinner. You hear the president talk about a payroll tax cut. I totally support that. I think that would help both the employer and the employees. There's other proposals out there about, you know, I'd have to look at how we would execute this, about addressing still the shortfall between, you know, last year's revenue and this year's revenue, and how do you supplement that through some additional funding. That'd be difficult to execute, I think, just you think about how many small businesses are in the country and how we would make that happen. But look, I'm open to whatever we need to do in order to propel and support our businesses, which are the backbone of jobs, right? And have it be targeted and have it be focused on job creation and small business support and, you know, good economic policy that's going to just propel things back to something positive, as opposed to heavy-handed, one-size-fits-all federal policies that are trying to reshape the government or whatever else you may see happening out there. So I'm open to your ideas. If you have any ideas, because we're in conversations all the time with our colleagues, with the White House, like any ideas, bring them send them our way. My team's available. Where are your voice? And this is a rare opportunity, I think, for swift action, as we've seen before, of you have innovative ideas about what will help small businesses, and sometimes it might be sector by sector. Give them to us, and we'll see if we can get them going.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Great question. Next, we have Sarah Gardner.
Hey, Sarah. Are you there?
She may not be able to unmute. Her question was, good morning, Senator. Thank you for being here. I'm concerned about employees not coming back to work because they are making more money on unemployment than they would coming back. I was wondering if you could share this concern and if you could support maybe ending the expansion on this next relief bill now that business is opening back up.
So this was something as we were forming the CARES Act, as I mentioned, because of the clunkiness of 50 different systems, 50 different processes within states, and the desire for speed, the feedback that we got through Treasury in working with the states was the only way to plus up unemployment to help just blunt the blow was a one-size-fits-all, which, again, usually is not going to be artful. We tried to cap it at, okay, you're going to get the $600 plus $600 up to what you were making before. So you're not going to actually get more than what you were making working. And that was actually, we had an amendment, I voted for it, it failed. But technically speaking, that would have been hard to implement, is my understanding, just across 50 states with the systems and the processes. However, underlying labor law still applies. So I talked to a small business owner the other day that she told one of her people they needed to come back to work. And they said, nope, I'm not doing it. I'm making more money on unemployment. She said, well, I'm going to report you, which is underlying labor law says you cannot turn down a job and collect unemployment. You cannot quit your job and collect unemployment. If you have the opportunity to work, you no longer qualify for unemployment. So if any of you are in situations like that, you can report that, and then they will not qualify for unemployment. I'm hearing more stories, though, of employers and employees, like, you guys are like a family. And so when an employee says, like, hey, I'd really rather not come back, and then the employer feels like, oh man, like, I understand you're trying to feed your family, okay. And it's more of a relationship thing where they're trying to, meet the needs of their employee, but then they feel bad about it, but they don't want to actually report them. So this is between the employer and the employee, but the bottom line is you cannot turn down a job and you cannot quit a job and get access to that $600. Most people, I think, do want to work, and this expanded unemployment plus up of an additional $600 ends at the end of July. That's coming fast. I mean, that's seemed like a long time when we passed the legislation. That's coming fast. And I think the most people I talk to with this uncertainty, they'd rather have a job and show that they're a reliable worker, even if it's less per week right now, but it puts them in a good place post-July, because that, the unemployment's only $240 a week maximum in Arizona past that. So there are pushes, as you can imagine, to expand and continue this increased unemployment for a very long time. We're hearing from a lot of people like all of you that that's not the way to solve the challenges we have here. We're trying to be very generous to help people, but we also don't want to disincentivize work.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question comes from Brendan Lyons. Brendan?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank the Hispanic Chamber for hosting this event, and Senator McSally, thank you for being on. Very important question here. I'm currently a candidate for the Arizona State House in Legislative District 9. I do not envision that raising taxes would be an immediate solution to rebounding our economy, as income taxes see a steep decline as workers are laid off or see their incomes reduced, or corporate income taxes fall because of business losses increase. How do we protect business owners from potential liabilities associated with COVID, as one question, and two, well, I'll go ahead and let that go for first.
Yeah, so this is a major issue we've heard from a lot of small businesses, is the concern about doing everything they can, right, in good faith, following the guidelines, but being protected. We can't have now, on top of the pandemic, an epidemic of trial lawyers who are taking advantage of small businesses, hospitals, nurses, and everybody who's out there. So liability protection is a main priority moving forward. I can speak for myself, hearing from a lot of small businesses and a number of senators here. I'll just be frank, it's mostly Republican senators who are saying this is an important piece in order to build confidence for small businesses to be able to feel that they can open back up again and not then be just crushed with massive lawsuits, even when they're actually following guidelines and trying to do the right thing. The challenge we have, of course, is somebody could go to a restaurant and then go to a grocery store and then do something else, and then 2 days later they come down with the virus. How do you trace that back to where they actually got it? And because it's invisible and it's very difficult to prove. So liability protection at the federal level is an important priority of ours moving forward. I know the state is, I think, addressing it as well within the state, but there's a lot of interstate commerce and cross-border companies and cross-border commerce. And this would not, just to be clear, if there is a nursing home that is negligent, and because of their gross negligence or their recklessness, one of our loved ones in Arizona passes away, they need to be held accountable. So when we're talking about liability protection, we're not talking about protection from gross negligence, from violations out there that are putting people at risk. That would still be allowed. But this is a very high priority for us. When I went in to get my pedicure, I had to sign a release form, right? That I'm not going to sue the nail salon if I get COVID after this. And it's just sad that they had to do that, but they had to protect themselves.
And my second question is, what advice would you have for state legislators to rebound this economy without having to raise taxes, as I previously cited?
Well, we each have our part at the state and the federal level. I would say, we had such a strong economy going in Arizona before this. So the fundamentals are still there. I think even more so, we just announced last week that there was a Taiwanese company coming with, I think, $12 billion of investments, 1,600 jobs for these semiconductor chips. That it's a really big deal, by the way, as we're trying to compete with our adversary China on these issues, to have Taiwan, who they continue to ignore, as a strong democratic, society, that they are now going to be coming to Arizona, of all places. So this is important for national security. It's important for jobs. I think you're going to see, as you see some of the challenges in other places, people are going to be voting with their feet as well. And I think the West is going to continue to see people coming out here for a lot of reasons. I think Arizona just attracting those new businesses and keep doing that, whatever incentives you want to figure out to do that, I think is important. And as we have the economy revive itself, the revenue will come back. We've been fiscally responsible as a state. We've had the rainy day fund. We've got a lot of federal assistance that's come in to try and blunt the blow. So you guys can figure out, the policies within the state. But for us, we're trying to incentivize pro-growth, pro-job, pro-innovation, right? Pro-opportunity, not heavy-handed, government solutions. And I think we have opportunities for that in areas of technology and some things where there's been, telehealth and other things. There's great opportunities, I think, for innovation and more Arizona companies here. We're also at the federal level looking to incentivize bringing back manufacturing from China. So you're going to see a lot of tax incentives we'll be working on for PPE, for pharmaceuticals, for you name it. We need to stop relying on an adversary when we're in situations like this. Let's bring those jobs home, and I think Arizona is going to be a great place. So the more Arizona can partner with us at the state level, we're going to work the policy so that we get it out of China. We need Arizona to figure out how it will come to Arizona versus some other state in the union, so we can have those jobs coming to Arizona.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our next question is, we're going to go back to Esther. Esther Marie Hillman had another question for us.
Yeah, actually it's a two-part, and I want to thank you also for taking your time and being here. And I know that you've been to many of the other chambers and other things, and I think it's something we should add to your regular schedule so more of us can actually see you that way. I have a question about large businesses that are on the stock exchange, whether there's going to be bailouts for that, such as airlines, rental cars, cruise industries. A lot of these companies that, especially like cruise industry, not being actually, although it's patronized and supported a lot by Americans, not necessarily being owned in America. On whether or not the government is going to allow the stock owners to take the hit on that, or whether there will be a buyout of that. And the other thing is there any kind of thing that's being looked at to protect some of these companies during this suppressed time when the stock market drops like this from something outside of our control, from keeping another country like China from coming in and just buying out our industries?
Yes, that's a great question. That second question, especially, I'm really concerned about. So on the first question, so our focus on small businesses was these PPP loans, the disaster loans, right, for 500 people and below. But look, we still have jobs in Arizona from big businesses, right? So if you're a family and you're going to work, you still want your job, whether you work for something that has more than 500 employees or not. What we also had in the CARES Act was a pretty significant support in government-backed loans for these larger businesses. You know, they have more ability for cash flow than a mom and pop shop does. And so there was about $500 billion in there for government-backed loans. And with the policies between Treasury and the Fed, these can actually be leveraged for significant additional resources to help with that cash flow. There's specific support to the airline industry in the CARES Act. That is a part of a foundation of our, society, and we want to make sure that they didn't obviously, go to a full collapse. But during the negotiations, there was a lot of back and forth about grants versus loans, and it ends up that, it's going to be, in the end, government-backed loans that will have to be given back to the taxpayer, but we needed to provide that support in order to help prop them up and keep some, workers on their payroll as people get back to traveling. For some of these other industries, I am just as concerned as you are related to China preying upon our companies. We've been talking with Treasury about prohibitions and other things related to Chinese companies. You may have seen yesterday we passed legislation unanimously in the Senate to kick a bunch of Chinese companies off the New York Stock Exchange that don't comply with auditing practices. They don't comply with any oversight that we have for U.S. companies, and that actually puts retail American investors at risk. And so we passed some legislation about this, but then the administration actually took action to kick one of them off already. It's the competitor to Starbucks. I forgot what the name of it is. But Borden from my team is on the line. Borden, can you talk a little bit more about the larger companies and some of the implications about, again, we just want to support the economy and support those jobs, do it in a responsible way, but also not allow predatory Chinese companies to benefit from the weakness in some of our businesses right now.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay.
Yep.
So for starters, as the Senator alluded to, Title IV of the CARES Act established some liquidity facilities for the Federal Reserve, and what their purpose is to ensure that those companies are able to access funds through a loan program, not a grant program, which is what the SBA PPP is for small businesses. So they can access loans on somewhat favorable terms to ensure that employment remains as relatively low as it possibly can. I mean, I don't know who saw us today. We saw another 2.3 million unemployed come out today. And so, the purpose was to give the small businesses that were forced to shut down, had nothing to do with the pandemic and, no fault of their own. So they have the grant program, the large businesses have the loan program, and all of it's sort of like a macroeconomical, systemic-wide issue. As the Senator alluded to, small businesses are the backbone in Arizona, but you don't want to have everybody that works for a larger company to be in the unemployment line also. So that doesn't do anyone any good, including the sort of trickle-down effects, so they wouldn't have money to spend in the small businesses. And the Federal Reserve has a lot of authority and a borrowing authority in that capacity, so they'll continue to monitor the situation. And another thing that the Senator worked on was ensuring that the forbearance and mortgage relief for both small businesses and renters and homeowners, because if they're losing their job, or even if they're on unemployment, I think a lot of people are probably pretty scared right now, and if they can qualify for the forbearance, they need that. And in order to avoid any sort of 2008-like real estate sort of crisis that Arizona, knows all too well, had to provide liquidity in those markets as well. So I want to be very clear that that portion, as news is described as a bailout, I would say that's a very inaccurate way of saying it. It's more of a loan program to sustain these businesses and their workforce. And then on the China front, it's called Lulin Coffee, I believe. And so a lot of companies that are listed on American exchanges, they import their home state regulations, whether it's accounting or capital or whatever it may be. And they don't subject themselves to United States regulation, which we think is fairly robust and sort of the hallmark of the free markets. And so making sure that companies that are not playing by the same rules as American companies are not going to be allowed to be listed over here. And that, of course, would preclude them from these Federal Reserve facilities as well, and benefiting from any of the stimulus that was included in the CARES Act. Sorry, I hope that's helpful. Nobody's asking any questions, so I hope that's good.
Thanks, Borden.
Thank you. The next one, Senator, is a comment that one. Thank you, Senator McSally. I apologize. Oh, they must fall off. No, there's another one. It's about, let me get it again. Sorry.
It's just a comment.
Yeah,
Going back to work mid-June. All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator McSally, for protecting older adult population. Please include more funding for workforce development assistance in future bills.
Yeah, so this came from, who'd that come from?
Economy for caregiving.
Oh yeah, okay. So interested, do you mean workforce development specifically for those who care for seniors, or just workforce development overall? I think I just will say generally, I think what we're going to see is that this pandemic, even if we were to get back to whatever is normal, I think there's going to be some disruptions that we need to be clear-eyed about that are going to bring some challenges, but also some opportunities, I guess, right? I think as some of the companies that are more office related have turned to telework and discovered that they can telework and still function well, that I think commercial office space may be something that takes a bit of a hit. I think as we do more telemedicine, there's tremendous opportunity for technology in medicine and technology in education as well. I think these are some disruptions that are going to be semi-permanent, if that makes sense. You know, as people have changed their behavior and realize they can work from home and do it effectively and efficiently, why would a company rent all this office space anymore? I'm not advocating for that, but we're hearing a lot of companies saying things like that. I think there's going to be some challenges with retail space, unfortunately, as people have changed their behavior of buying to be more online. They may not go back. And so we just need to be responsive and innovative as Arizonans to see where the opportunities are, not where they were. And then as quickly as possible, if we could train the workforce, that gets into the whole workforce development, right? Where are the new opportunities and how can we train those who are in areas that maybe were declining already, but the pandemic kind of pushed them faster, and move them into the areas that have openings and opportunities for increases in jobs, and let's make sure we have a trained and ready workforce for that. So that's not all going to be at the federal level, but we do need targeted support. I think most of that, from my view, is we have like 47 different job training programs at the federal level. I think those resources need to flow to the states that are just uniquely positioned for those partnerships at the state and local level between educational institutions and the private sector to figure out what they need for workforce training and let them work that more locally than, through top-down Washington, D.C. managed programs. Oh, you're on mute, Isabel.
We have another question, and this is back to Esther Marie.
Yeah.
Some of the regulations that HIPAA and stuff like that, where before doctors couldn't converse with patients from their telecommunication devices, their computer at home, their office had certain equipment on it, or they could not do that. Some of that was loosened specifically because of the incident with Corona and things like that. Do you see the government passing down and easing up those types of legislation so that, because I mean, I know that a lot of, especially elderly clients, are finding it very useful to not to have to travel to a doctor, to not to have to do some of the other things, and actually feeling like they have more of the undivided attention of their doctor through some of the television.
Yes, no, I agree. We've been talking about this, how this has been an acceleration of telehealth, and where some people may have been a little resistant to even embracing it, even when it was available. Now they realize, like, wait, I don't have to travel. I don't have to sit in a waiting room, and I can just, talk to my doctor either virtually or on the phone through video. This is a great way to do it. So our intent is to keep as many of those regulations relaxed as possible in the medium term here, with the intent to make them permanent moving forward. Whether we need to do that legislatively or through rulemaking, I'm not totally sure. I know we've just provide, there was the ability to relax a lot of that. And obviously doctors need to be paid for it. So that was the other element, right? The reimbursement part being at parity of an office visit. So, so that it was also helping them to be able to keep the lights on, during this. So I totally support us keeping those regulations relaxed. Well, we also are mindful of cybersecurity, right? Because the more we put our personal information, through these means, we know there's bad actors out there, whether it's criminals or, China and Russia and North Korea, who want to try and get access to people's information that's using virtual means or other online means. So we've got to beef up the capabilities there. But there's other, great potentials where, yeah, you might need your, blood sugar or blood pressure monitored, but you can, have the ability to do that at home and have it just transferred, beamed over to your doctor's office so they can, see, how you're, whether you're getting yourself into a risk situation before you end up in the emergency room. So there's great opportunities for using this technology more and keep going with the telehealth piece and virtual health piece. I think it's been a great innovation from this pandemic, and we got to keep it going. I agree.
Okay, we had a question emailed, and it goes back to a point you made earlier. There was concern with the forgivable loans on PPP because funding is barely coming for some businesses, and the deadline is also around the corner. So
yeah, so the legislation we're working on with Marco Rubio would expand it. So for each business, it was 8 weeks from the day the loan has gotten moving forward. But I think, Borden, isn't it up till the end of June in the original legislation, June 30th?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So what we're trying to do is provide more flexibility, expand it, and that's not just past June 30th, but expand the number of weeks it can be used for per business. So if you were one of the ones who got it mid-April, don't have that expiring 8 weeks for you, have that be expanded. So that's the legislation we're trying to push through unanimously here. Ideally today, well, keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully nobody will object to it, because we know this is an important issue of just having that flexibility to, lengthen it out for those who got it early, but also if you haven't gotten it yet, moving that window, to the right so that you can use the fullness of it if you get one today, for example.
Another email question was more of a comment, but again, going back to the 501c6s. Understand, but the comment is, these are organizations with boots on the ground that are actually helping their communities, and again, what can we expect in terms of support in this area?
So we've been advocating for you guys. We've engaged on this issue. We know it's important. If there is another round of PPP and it's an act of Congress, then we're going to fight to have C6s included. The current tranche, it's not authorized, and so we would have to pass legislation to look back at the last tranche to be able to include them. Something, Borden, let's follow up on that, since the rest of PPP has not been fully exhausted yet. Maybe there is an opportunity for C6s to be added, but we would need to again pass it with consent on both sides of the aisle without anybody hijacking it with some other item.
Okay. And last question, this is on the tax credits. So again, you mentioned potential opportunities there. What should businesses be looking at in terms of records and trying to prepare for opportunities to look at tax credits in the future?
Well, we don't know what they're going to be yet, but I'd love to hear your ideas. Again, we want to incentivize hiring. We want to incentivize economic activity. We want to incentivize people being able to get back to work, strong business growth. So if you all have ideas on tax credits, let us know. I mean, payroll tax credit obviously is one. I mentioned the business deduction, tax credits for bringing manufacturing home. That's for businesses of all sizes. You could be an entrepreneur who wants to start a PPE business. Then we want to have those tax credits for you to incentivize so you can compete initially. Look, we offshored all of this stuff because it was cheaper. So we've got to incentivize financially for Made in America for these things that are a part of our health security. So keep an eye on it, but give us your ideas as well. But we want these things made in America. They're better made anyway. We want the opportunity for American jobs and to not have to rely on an adversary in the future. I'll just tell you a little quick story. One other thing I'm working on here. You know, I order stuff on Amazon all the time, and I'm just mindful these days of like, is this made in America or is this made in China, right? I want to know that. So I'm like trying to order a face mask that's got an Arizona flag. It's not the one I've been wearing. That one is actually made by my friend. And, you know, I couldn't tell in any research, like, where is this company located? And I finally did like contact seller. Now I've been doing this a lot. Where are you located? Are you in China? Are you a Chinese company? And I've had some pretty hilarious exchanges with people. But, you know, when one of them, you know, first came back and said, yes, we are, I was like, cancel my order. I'm sorry. I'm not giving $1 to the communist regime that's responsible for this pandemic. I'm certainly not going to wear an Arizona flag mask that's been made in China. But I've been doing this on almost everything I'm ordering on Amazon. I contact seller and I say, where are you made? Are you made in America or are you made in China? Everything from refrigerator filters to you name it. I want to know those things. I don't know about you guys. And you know, you may pay a little bit more, but I'm at this place where I want to know if something's made in China. I want to know if it's made in America. So I'm working on legislation to actually have that available online. If you're purchasing something online, just allow people to have a choice. Like, I may have to pay a little bit more for an American company, but I choose to have that information. I want to have that information so I can make that choice. Versus something that's made in China. So stay tuned for my legislation on that. I'm tired of communist China right now. Obviously, it's just a burr in my saddle here as they're responsible for so many deaths and trying to take over the world. So we've got to do our part, I think, to stop that from happening.
All right, those were the last questions. Any final comments, Senator McSally? We are so grateful for the time you spent here. We know you're in Washington, so thank you for taking this time.
That's all right. Just please pass your ideas to us. This is an opportunity for us to be able to, with a representative government, be able to deploy to DC as we're talking about what ideas are out there that are going to continue to move the economy forward, support small businesses, provide opportunities for more people to work, provide more opportunities for economic growth. Tell us what your ideas are. I mean, we're in a very fluid environment here, so it's not like business as usual. So if you got an idea, even if you think it's crazy, send it on to our team. There's no judgment in brainstorming, right? So as we're brainstorming together, you all are out there every single day. Let us know what ideas at the federal level you think that we could do in order to help you and incentivize this environment we want to create to allow people to thrive and prosper and continue to get back to strong economic growth. So we're here, and now is an opportunity. So please get the feedback to us. God bless you all. I know these are uncertain times. We're going to get through it together. To get through this together. It is bringing out the best in people too, and I think we've also been mindful of the most important things in our lives as well. And let's just keep fighting through this together as a country and as a state. And I'm really proud to see how Arizonans have been working together to get through this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And it looks like everybody is sending thank you notes as well. So,
all right. Thanks, everybody. Be safe. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.